started? Okay. All right. Well, Richard or Brian, did you want to kick things off and then we'll take over from there?
Yeah, so I'll just start informally. We're short a couple of members, but I think one of them contacted me and said she couldn't make it, and Mr. Martinez um, has other obligations a lot of the time. So this may be all we get. So we'll get started, and if they show up, that's great. So I want to thank everybody for coming in and participating. I hope we're not getting too much echo over the feed. But I don't have a whole lot to say, so it's 5:30. I think we should just get started.
Great. Well, I will kick us off. Thanks, Brian. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Marie, for arranging this. Hi, everyone. Again, Adrian Fine. I'll tell you, for those that don't remember my background, I'll share that a little bit later, but we're going to go ahead and launch right into this. So this is kind of part two of our camp experience with you all. So we're very excited, and just going to run through a few things first as we start. Just as a reminder, this is a program of the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions, or NAPC. It's an opportunity for today to dig a little deeper in terms of the idea of outreach, which I think commissions in some ways have both an obligation and an uncomfortable relationship with. In terms of outreach. It's something that we all need to do, but it's hard and you don't always know where to start. So we're going to take a deeper dive than what we did with the in-person camp that some of you or maybe all of you were at in October in person, and talk more about what this means and how we can maybe think about how that might work for your community. We want this to be informal, more of a conversation. We've got some challenges how we'll do that with Zoom, but we'll make it work. So it won't be us speaking the whole time. We want it to be more of an exchange and interaction in terms of this. But let me quickly kind of go through the program, and then we're going to do a quick round of introductions, and then we'll get started in terms of this. So let's start with who we are. You sort of know me, but I'll give you a little bit more background as we begin. But I'm going to turn it over to Chris, who's the other camp trainer for today. Chris, you're on mute.
There I am. All right. Thank you, Adrian. All right. I'm very happy to be here. I wish I was here in person in Rhode Island. So I am a Rhode Island native. Lived in Rhode Island for the first 4 years of my life, born in Providence, and then lived in North Situate. And then from the time I was 4 years old on, lived in Massachusetts. And still live in Massachusetts today. I live in the western part of the state, almost in Vermont. And background in historic preservation really picked up when I joined the Massachusetts Historical Commission, and I was the director of local government programs at the Massachusetts State Historic Preservation Office. And so we have about 450 local commissions around the state. Some of them are just advisory. Some of them have local historic district ordinances. But they're basically all volunteers and needed lots of assistance, guidance on the kinds of things that they're working on, including administering their local historic districts. So I did for 23 years. I spent time answering questions from local commissions, phone calls, emails, putting together guidebooks for them, doing lots of presentations with them. And then when I heard about NAPC and doing camps, I jumped at that chance to spend more time with them and just really get a sense of how commissions work around the country. Has been really wonderful to as much as I've brought my background to the local camps around the country. Every camp I go to, I learn something new. So I'm really looking forward to learning something from you as well. So I don't work at the SHPO anymore. I do consulting. I'm a historic preservation planning consultant right now. So I've been doing that for about 2 years.
Great, thanks, Chris. And again, Adrian Fine here. I'm in Los Angeles, so don't hold that against me being a West Coaster. I used to be on the East Coast in Philadelphia and worked for the National Trust. So I worked kind of the New England states from Maine to Delaware, and was in Rhode Island a lot. So I know your world to some degree. And I've always worked with commissions in lots of different capacities, which I'll share a little bit later in terms of this work from small cities to medium-sized, large, and I've worked mostly in the nonprofit sector. I'm currently with the Los Angeles Conservancy. So I've always been kind of more of the nonprofit side of working with commissions at both the local, regional, statewide, and national levels. But we'll get into that more. But let's talk a little bit about what we're going to do today. And we worked with you all to kind of think about what we did back in October in person, what would make sense for us to do today in terms of a little more tailored approach and again, a deeper dive into specifically around outreach strategies and how that might be helpful for you all in thinking about where do you go with this? What are the next steps? So Chris is going to take the first segment from 5:45 about public outreach and community engagement. Following that, I will be doing the promoting historic preservation beyond historic districts section. Again, we're going to talk for parts of that, and then we really want it to be more of an interaction. You have questions, you have thoughts, you need specific guidance on something that you're wanting to do right now that fits under these categories, feel free. We want this to be interactive in terms of this conversation and this workshop. So that's the plan that we've outlined for this. Before we start, I want to remind you all should be members of the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions. If you're not, we'll make sure you get access to that for those that took part in the CAMP program in October. But just remind you that these are two of the best benefits of being affiliated and associated with the Alliance. One is the Alliance Review, which is this amazing quarterly journal that if there's probably an issue that you're dealing with or you're thinking about or you're not sure how to approach in terms of the work that your commission's doing, it's probably already been covered to some degree in terms of some of the work that's in the journal. So past issues, great resources. If not, it's probably coming up. I think the upcoming issue may be dealing with kind of housing and talking about how that issue is impacting and affiliated with the work of commissions, which is highly relevant to so many places around the country right now in terms of that kind of potential conflict of the work that we do. But it's also, I think, a key confluence in terms of what we do that's part of the housing strategy. And then the other piece to this is the listserv. If you have a burning question, you don't have time to go through the Alliance review or do any research, just throw it out into the listserv. And it's a very chatty group, very helpful resource in terms of people. So if you haven't availed yourself of either of these resources already, please do. They're there for you. And again, I think they could be really helpful in terms of the work that you're doing. So with that, we're going to just jump right into this, and Chris is going to take us off. But before we do that, we'd like to go around the room and do some quick introductions. And I would just ask, just let us know who you are, how long you've been on the commission, and if there is one thing that you're really hoping to get out of the program today. And maybe if we start with Murray, and then if you can designate who follows you, and then we'll start with Chris after your introductions.
Yeah, did I push the wrong mute button?
I think everyone else in your room needs to be on mute, other than you.
How's this?
Try that.
A little bit better? Okay. Murray Gates, I've been on the HDC for approximately 1 year. And the whole concept of outreach has been very important to me, and we can talk a little bit more about some of the challenges that we have locally, but I've always felt that people in the community don't fully appreciate or actually have a negative reaction towards much of what we do within the HDC. So just looking to really find out what strategies we can employ that address that negative perception. And I'll pass the torch, whoever wants to go next.
Rich, you're on mute.
I'm Richard Youngkin. and I'm gonna go slowly because we have quite an echo here. Been on the HDC for, oh, maybe more than a decade, and have served as the chair and the vice chair over a period of time. But I'm no longer the chair. Murray is the chair. Big relief. Anyway, over that period of time, I'd like to second what Murray has said. We have always been concerned about our image and profile in the community, and have not really felt that we have much of one, and that the work that we do in Kingston may be understood in Kingston, but it's not understood outside. So the town is a huge town with many resources outside of Kingston, and we have very little communication. And I think, you know, we need to try to better that. And so I'm really looking forward to whatever comes out, excuse me, of these talks that we have. David? David Hill.
I'm David Hill. Regret not having video capability, so we'll press on. I'm the newest member of the HDC. I've been on for about 3 or 4 months. I'm the newest vice chair as well. And I think we're all in agreement that what we're looking forward to is the development of a community public relations strategy that we can execute. And also, I think I'm interested in what our advisory role is in terms of historic resources and the township, our advisory role to the town council. And with that, David.
Hi, I'm David Nedwidak. I've been on the commission for about a year. I had a previous experience with positive experience with the commission back in the 1980s when I bought a house that was in pretty bad shape, 1732 Georgian, and eventually got nominated and made it to the National Register through the help of the Historic Commission, actually nominating me to the state. So I felt really indebted to them for doing that. I learned a lot from the process. But I also learned at the time, I knew nothing. I started going around the neighborhood asking people if they're interested in the Historic District Commission, finding some way to protect the area. Plus there was a private right of way that was next to our house that was up for sale, and a lot of things that could have really threatened the house. So I counted on them back then. I also got a real clear indication from neighbors, the pushback you get when you start talking about any kind of Historic District Commission and what their perception is of the limitations of it. So it's been 30 years since I did that, but and I actually just joined a year ago because I ran into Rich down at the seawall in Narragansett, and he asked me if I'd be interested. So.
Good catch. Good catch.
I don't know.
Yes, definitely a good catch. Anyone else, or is that cover everyone?
I think so.
Okay, Chris, take us away.
Hi. All right, so I'm just going to do a little bit of an intro PowerPoint presentation here. Like Adrian said, we really don't want to be the ones doing all the talking here. This is really a chance to have a discussion and a back and forth, and kind of get a real sense of what you have for questions, and how it can really be more strategic in what you're thinking about. So this is going to be part of what I have a whole, as part of the NEPC menu of presentations. This is a part of my outreach and community engagement presentation that goes on for about 45-50 minutes, but I'm not doing that tonight. I'm only going to be talking for maybe 10 minutes, 15 minutes at the most, and I'll probably just stop and see where we can have open up a discussion from that point. So I just thought I would get going with some thoughts. And I'm going to start off with a question for you. Who was the first historic preservationist? Any ideas on that? Sort of a philosophical question. So I'm gonna go to the next slide here. And some of you may recognize this name right here, Anne Pamela Cunningham. When I was while I was at the Massachusetts Historical Commission, I was also teaching at the University of Massachusetts Amherst for cultural resource management. And having never taught that course before, I had to do a lot of research, background understanding, sort of just the introductory history of historic preservation. And Anne Pamela Cunningham's name kept coming up as sort of where historic preservation originated. Now she was part of she led the Mount Vernon Ladies Association. And so when Mount Vernon was falling apart, threatened with demolition, she led a campaign, a national campaign, involved lots of people sending in a penny here, a penny there. And little by little, there was enough money to actually do a restoration of Mount Vernon. And it was so successful that today, Mount Vernon is still run by the Mount Vernon Ladies Association. So a really amazing success story here for this building. But something didn't quite make sense when I read about this as sort of where the historic preservation began. And the reason for that is, so I was at Mass Historical Commission for about 23 years. And in those 23 years of working with the 400 or so local commissions around the state, talking to them every day, not once did I ever give this advice. Buy that historic property, raise funds for its restoration, open the building as a museum. 23 years, I never said that. In fact, if anybody called me and said, we want to open up a house museum, I'd be like, no, don't do it. I was far more interested in offering advice like this. How about community-wide historic preservation planning? Community education about historic resources, adaptive reuse of historic resources instead of museums, passing local preservation ordinances, many other things like that. So if that's what I was recommending all the time in terms of good local strategies for local commissions, it made me kind of think a little more deeper about who was the first historic preservationist then out there. And it made me wonder, could it have been someone thousands of years ago? Going back a little bit more. And around this time that I started teaching at UMass, I watched this documentary just coincidentally, and it was about cave paintings. And in this documentary, it talked about this amazing cave that they found in France. And of course, it had been blocked up for thousands of years. And what they found in this cave was that at the very entrance of the cave, as you first went in, there were these really simple handprints. So just very, very simple paintings that were done just with hands. As you went further into the cave, it got a little more complex. You'd start to see some stick figures, some human aspect there. And then as you went further into the cave, it was actually action kinds of things taking place. Hunting scenes, things like that. Humans, animals, all these interactions taking place. That's what was on the walls. And the whole point of the documentary was to really say, isn't this amazing? Because in this one cave, you can see the whole evolution of cave paintings over many, many thousands of years. And I thought to myself, that is really amazing that you can see the evolution of cave paintings over the millennia. But what's even more amazing to me was, why did the people that came in 5,000, 10,000 years after the first handprints were done, why didn't they destroy those hand paintings and just do their own paintings over those ones? They went further into the cave. Happened again. The next group that came in another 5,000 years after that for more complex drawing cave paintings, they went further into the cave. These earliest cave paintings were still there. And so I've always just started to wonder, how did they save these cave paintings through the millennia without a historic preservation ordinance in place? Well, of course, the reason that these cave paintings were saved somehow probably had to do with some sense of somebody recognizing along the way, those are our ancestors that put those cave paintings there with just those handprints. Let's leave them alone. And so I just sort of imagine this whole social aspect to groups coming in and saying, no, we're not going to touch those right there. We're going to go in deeper to do our own cave paintings. And I love that idea that just by a collective sense that these are important, just by maybe elders saying to the younger people in the group, no, don't touch those. We're going to go further into the cave. And so that really leads me to my counterintuitive reality when it comes to historic preservation. Now, you can do historic preservation with only non-regulatory tools. You can be very, very effective. And so in Massachusetts, we have way over 100 local commissions that have no regulatory ordinance whatsoever, but they can still be effective. You can do historic preservation with regulatory and non-regulatory tools. That's kind of the best approach right there, is when you've got a local historic district ordinance in place, maybe you have something like demolition delay ordinance in place, and you've got non-regulatory tools at your availability as well. You can't do historic preservation with only regulatory tools. If you focus only on your ordinance, you're sort of setting yourself up for failure right there. And I've worked with dozens of local commissions over the years that really thought once they had that local historic district in place, once they had the ordinance, they are home free. We don't have to think about things after that. We have our way to protect historic resources. It just doesn't work that way. I've gotten to visit lots of local historic districts, of course, in Massachusetts, lots of local historic districts around the country now through NEPC camps. And I'm just amazed by the kinds of historic resources that I get to go see that are protected through local historic districts. And with all that, it is easy to forget, though, things can change. Has there ever been any signs like this in South Kingstown? No. This would never happen, of course, in South Kingston. But it does happen in some places. So yeah, signs like this have been come up plenty of times. And these are quotes from the newspaper. A lot of the issue is inconsistency with decision making. Just one of the complaints that comes up when it comes to the local historic district commission. So one of the essential ways of our local historic districts really being a part of our future is really thinking about outreach and engagement. This is something to aspire to right here. So, maybe you're not at this level, but try to think about sort of aspiring to this, where your design review, time and energy that goes into design review is over here, not too much. Designation a little more, survey a little more time, preservation planning a little more time. Outreach and engagement is actually where you spend most of your time as a local historical commission or district commission. Something to aspire to right there. But really, you're going to be most effective if you can have something that looks like this. I've heard lots and lots of quotes over the years. I could spend the whole evening just talking about my quotes, And if you have some good quotes that you've heard over the years yourself, I'm always looking for more good quotes. So feed them to me later. But this is one I've heard from a local commission. We can't do historic preservation in our town. We don't have any regulations, no ordinance, teeth. What we need are teeth. And to that, I say wrong. Encouraging interest is effective and essential. Really have to be thinking about how you encourage historic preservation through all kinds of different means. And that means within the local historic district and outside the local historic district as well. So do you have something like this? Historic plaque program. I love historic plaque programs as a way to really give a lot of pride to property owners in the local historic district. This is a great way to generate interest by property owners, but also by people that are just walking through the local historic district as well. You can walk through a local historic district and really get a sense of the history just by looking at the facades of the buildings. I love local historic district signs. So these are a great way to market your local historic district as well. Again, I think they have a sense of pride for property owners that are in the local historic district. But they also have an added benefit of somebody saying, I didn't know I was in a local historic district. It's a lot harder to say you didn't know you were in a local historic district when there are signs at every entrance to the local historic district saying that this is a local historic district here. So it's a nice low budget, low hanging fruit way of really publicizing, marketing your local historic district, just having some entering historic district signs. You might want to have a preservation awards program. I'm going to say this is often best to be done when it's done by a nonprofit organization. But if that's not possible, then the Historic District Commission could be running a preservation awards program as well. Do you have some events that you could do? Some walking tours in the local historic district, a great way for property owners in the local historic district to network, to learn who their neighbors are in the local historic district. I love that idea of just being able to have somebody leading all the property owners in the local historic district so that they can learn not just about the history of their own house, but can learn about the whole neighborhood. This one in Cambridgeport is really interesting to me because it was done as a walking tour, but was really led by the property owners themselves. And it was a sort of an oral history. So if you knew something about your house, you would make these temporary plaques. And for one afternoon, you would put this temporary plaque out in front of your house, and you would walk around and see all the plaques that were put up by your neighbors, and a great way to meet everyone in town that way. Preservation Month is May. It's a great time to really get a lot of activities together at that point. Might want to have an old house fair or an expo for property owners in the local historic district, or if you wanted to do this for the larger community as well, that's been really a useful tool. This is something that's done sometimes. It's not design guidelines. It's actually really it's meant to be a homeowner handbook about the history of the neighborhood and how you care for your properties, basic maintenance on your properties. I've seen this work really well in some local historic districts. Social media, certainly great idea to take on social media if you can do that as well. There's a wonderful webinar that was done by National Alliance of Preservation Commissions 2 years ago, I think. You can see that on YouTube, and it really talks about all the social media strategies that are out there. I love it when local historic district commissions can get some activities for kids and teachers and parents together, so you can actually walk around the local historic district, and kids aren't just doing what they usually do, which is just sort of walk through the museum. and just walk by the old farm implements or walk through the museum where they can't touch things, the historical society. It's great when they can be outside running around, doing something like a scavenger hunt in the local historic district, saying, pointing out all the interesting things on a building. It works really well. All right, and of course, things for the adults, the grown-ups, the walking tours, the house tours, the special access tours. These can work really well in local historic districts too. All right. So I don't know if if you've seen this yet in the research materials, but I put a one-pager handout of over 50 ideas just for outreach and community engagement. If you haven't seen that yet, I can email it to everyone later. It's basically a laundry list of all these ideas just to help you with outreach and community engagement. But it's kind of an overwhelming list too, because there's so many different ideas on what you could do to really improve your outreach and community engagement. So I want to also just bring up the idea of a preservation plan as a great way to have a chapter on outreach. A preservation plan can really be a way to survey the community, survey the property owners in the district, get a sense of what people are concerned about, what are their issues coming up. And then your preservation plan can actually address how to do better outreach with the property owners in a local historic district. Another idea I come up with, but nobody's ever taken me up on this. I recommended this year after year when I was at the SHPO, at Mass Historical Commission, to do an outreach and education plan. Just come up with a goods analysis of what the property owners are concerned about in your local historic district. Listen to them, listen to what their concerns are, what their challenges are, being part of a local historic district, and then really strategize on how your outreach and education can really address the kinds of things that they're bringing up. So that could be something really small. It could be just something a few pages long, but it's been done so that you're really analyzing what the specific concerns are that are coming up in your community. All right, I think I should probably stop and take some. Why don't we stop here and have some discussion, and then if we want to do some more slides, I can go from there.
Yeah, Dave. Not sure where the echo is coming from. Hello? It's
We
better.
can hear you. Go ahead. And
We can hear you pretty well.
Okay. Yeah, just some quick comments in terms of regulatory tools. Our our town charter and municipal code, section 1419, states the town solicitor shall institute appropriate action to prevent, enjoin, abate, or remove such violations. And I'm not sure what that means, what appropriate actions are. And I would assume, and again, I'm the newest member here, so I'm not aware of a lot, but enforcement, I think our regulatory enforcement comes with the non-issuance of permits. And so those are probably our two major compliance enforcement tools. And I was wondering if anyone had any comment about that.
Yeah, I can start and then.
What an appropriate action would be, and has appropriate action by the town solicitor ever been actually taken?
Well, there are enforcement actions outside of the permitting process. So I'll turn off my camera while I'm responding. Yeah, say for example, somebody makes modifications to a property without having received the appropriate approvals from the historic district commission. The solicitor can initiate legal proceedings to enforce the town's ordinance. That has not been done since I've been here. We did threaten such an action with the Asa Potter House on the corner of Kingstown Road and Old North Road, because they have removed architectural features under a previous repair approval and never returned them to the structure. But we were able to coerce compliance and get them to agree to put the features back on the house. Shortly after we issued the orders for them to do that, they sold the house, and the new buyer has followed through with those requirements. So there are legal options out there. We just haven't exercised.
Haven't had the need. The other thing I wanted to, in terms of public relations, I just wanted to remind everyone that South Kingstown is celebrating our 300th anniversary of the founding of the township, and you know, there certainly could be an opportunity to promote historic resource preservation in conjunction with our anniversary through a public relations strategy. And we brought up social media. We have a really active South Kingstown, Our Town Facebook page, which is hundreds and hundreds of residents are involved or signed up on that particular Facebook page. Lots of activity every day, and we could certainly promote preservation there as one non-regulatory tool. And I was wondering, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I'm done. Thank you.
You're done? Okay. All right. Yeah, I'm just gonna jump back to violations and enforcement, because I think that was a great topic to bring up. It's kind of might be a strange one to think about in terms of a whole discussion about outreach and community engagement, but violation and enforcement is so tied to proper outreach and community engagement. And so just one quick way to think about violations are, the best way to deal with violations are making sure you don't have any violations. And the best way to do that is to have an outreach program that is robust enough that violations just aren't going to come up very frequently, because people are going to be well aware they're in a local historic district. Your municipal officials are going to be well aware of what the process works in terms of your building department. And there isn't going to be, there's going to be an understanding of what happens if there is a violation that takes place. So I think there's a number of things that you can do. Start, I think just with those entering historic district signs as a way to try to discourage anyone saying that I didn't know I was in the local historic district. Other things that you can do, definitely a mailing once a year or more frequently. I mean, if you could manage doing a newsletter once a month, that would be great, but at least a mailing once a year that goes to every property owner saying, explaining what the local historic district is, maybe a trifold brochure that goes out to them, explaining where they would go look at the design guidelines, where they would go look at an application, explaining the benefits of a local historic district. Your newsletter, if you had a newsletter that could go out, I've seen it where the violations, if there are any, are included in the newsletter. That's a really good idea to do it that way. So if you get one violation, it's very easy to get 2, 3, 4, because once you get one violation that's not addressed, you have to get a couple more that say, oh, well, they didn't do anything to that property owner. I'll just go ahead and do that work as well. If you have a newsletter where you're actually pointing out where that the violations are there, even if you through your council, through the court system, whatever you need to do, that can be a long, slow process. Even if it hasn't necessarily been addressed, at least if it's in the newsletter, everyone's aware that, oh, the Historic District Commission knows that violation is there. It's observed, it's on their radar. It's going to give a little bit of a public notice that I better not seek my own violation as well. Most projects in the local historic district are going to need a building permit. Not all of them. So I don't know how fences and things like that work. In Massachusetts, it would work if it was a small fence. It would be a structure, but it wouldn't necessarily need a building permit unless it went over 6 feet. And so that's where things got a little messy. So for the most part, work on property in the local historic district needs to get a building permit or a demolition permit. And that's why it's really important to have an excellent working relationship with your building commissioner, building department, and so that they are fully understand that if a project comes into them in the building department, that it has to go, that they would have to go to the Historic District Commission as well.
Chris, can I just add to that a little bit on the kind of confluence of the question of enforcement violations and outreach? Because I also agree. I think there's a natural connection there that ideally, as Chris has said, you don't have any violations. That's what you're striving for, and everyone's following the rules. But the reality is that's probably not going to happen, and you probably have had instances. The other reason I would bring this up is that when you do have a violation and you do go around to enforcing it, whether it's through local media or word of mouth, it's going to get around. And then you're going to deal with damage control if you haven't messaged this or been clear about what the issue is, why it's being enforced, what the remedy is. Otherwise, it's going to take a life of its own, and it's probably going to be misconstrued. It's going to be associated more with the person that did the violation versus the violation itself. So it's going to be more, you did this to this person, which then just feeds into all the things we already know about the myths and misconceptions of the work that you're doing. So that's where it comes again, the need to be proactive and reactive in these situations in terms of your outreach. So I just want to throw that out as well.
Yeah. If you don't have your procedures lined up ahead of time, that's a really good thing to think about. So that if there is a violation, here's what we're going to do first. We're going to write a letter to the property owner, very friendly letter saying you may not have realized you're in a local historic district and this project needs approval. Of course, that's going to be, you also really want to go right to the building department as well if there is a building permit that was needed, and the building department can then issue the stop work order at that time. And then your follow-up letter can just be basically saying, here's the application, here's the process that would go. We're happy to get this on the next agenda once you fill out once you complete an application. But yeah, I'd agree with Adrian. It can get really messy fast with violations. So the worst ones are elderly person that's covered the house with vinyl siding, and now the district commission is requiring that the vinyl siding gets removed, and that's going to be a $20,000 project to remove the vinyl siding. Yeah, whatever you can do to not get into that situation to begin with, really important. And that all comes down to really good outreach and good relationships with your building officials, your town, your attorney or counsel, and the property owners themselves.
So I have a question.
Sure, I know we have two people up with their hands as well.
This has to do with, I think all the things that we just talked about, we're doing okay in Kingston itself, and we can get into other things at the next session, the next part of this when we talk about outside Kingston.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I've been thinking about is the real estate agents. And I wondered if you had between you, Adrian and Chris, any experience with working closely with real estate agents so that they give the correct message during a house sale. I think in terms of Kingston itself, I think we've had some situations where we wondered if the agent involved was really on board with the historic district and was able to convey that to the new owners or the prospective buyers, and how that was, you know, if it was effective. Well, I mean, I thought that maybe we could have sessions with real estate agents. We could have,
Mhm.
you know, kind of greet and meet kind of things going on with them, so that we really have them on our side, and they understand all the parameters and are on board. I know in other historic districts that are well established, I'm thinking about Newport, Rhode Island, for instance, the real estate agents seem to know a lot more about historic preservation than in other places. Even though our district is ancient, goes back to 1958, with zoning, I don't have the same feeling for that here. So I'll put on my mute and let you guys speak.
Yeah, I could just start, and then I'm sure Adrian will probably want to follow up with a few more things. Two groups that I think are great to do outreach to: contractors and real estate agents. And I would do that with a number of different ways, but one way that's been done around the country. I haven't done this personally, but I'm familiar with some programs that have been done. They actually have a workshop for real estate agents. I think in some cases they can actually do this where the realtors get credits, continuing ed credits, to attend one of your workshops on the local historic district. And you can picture that just being this wonderful morning session on the history of the district, the architectural styles of the district, what the benefits of a local historic district, what it means to be in a local historic district. Marie's saying that NAPC does realtor training, and this can be a great way for realtors to really not just learn about the district, but actually really helps them, because especially if that's something like architectural styles or the history of the district, in terms of building that relationship with a prospective client, the more that they can really sell that neighborhood, the wonderful history there, the architectural style of a building, something like that, it benefits them and they pick up on that. So that's a great program to run just for realtors. Contractors the same way. Maybe focus a little bit more on your contractor program in terms of the application process, the public hearing process. But contractors love these programs as well. Again, have a morning program, you got coffee, donuts going, and they can come in and understand what the process is going to be to get a project approved within the local historic district. And it's, again, just building a really good relationship with the contractors.
I was just going to say, Rich, this is a perfect opportunity to cultivate, a relationship with the realtors. They are the first ambassadors for new owners, that are buying properties in the district or outside and just old buildings in general. And a lot of them want the knowledge. They don't have the training that you all do or that we have. They don't understand styles. They want to be more informed. So, if you did a workshop or whatever like that, they're probably going to want that and be welcome to it. I know at least one community, I know there's a number of others in addition to what NAPC does, where they'll do certification. So it's not just one program or one workshop, it's over a series that they're building on. Like this week, they're talking about this type of architectural styles. This week, they're talking about the incentives that are available if you're in a protected property or whatever it might be. So there's a number of ways you could approach this.
Murray's had his hand up for a little bit there.
Is it ready for prime time?
Go for it, Murray.
Does it work? Okay, so I had a question specific to the placking program, which Chris had a slide on that. It's very timely because we've been talking about a placking program for a long time, but we now have some funding that's ready to push in that direction. Beyond just putting the plaques up, any other strategies for maximizing the value of a plaquing program, maybe tying other programs into it? And I'll go on mute.
Yeah, great question. This definitely goes into promoting preservation beyond the historic districts. So a little bit more into Adrian's presentation, because you can do a plaque program community-wide, a great way to generate historic preservation interest throughout the whole town. The way this works best is when you have good survey ahead of time. So you have good information about your historic resources. So that means date of constructions, and a good relevant historic name that's going to go on the plaque. You really can't run a plaque program unless you've got some basic information about the property itself, basically, especially date of construction. I've seen some ridiculous plaques out there, the 1640s and the 1650s, and there's just no way those buildings are actually. I mean, some of the, obviously in Rhode Island, New England, we have buildings that date from those from the 1600s, but it's often wishful thinking, and the research has been a little sparse on some of them. So good survey to start off with, and then I'd recommend an application process. So this is especially true if you're doing this outside the local historic district, where there's a real criteria, some criteria that you really have to go through to be eligible for a plaque on your house. So it's not like anybody gets a plaque. It's got to be researched. It's got to be documented well in terms of a survey form, and it's got to have some level of integrity to it. This is a great way to just sort of encourage good stewardship of properties. So maybe if the house is covered with vinyl siding, maybe that means it's not eligible for a plaque on the house. So it's got to have some basic sense of integrity before you're eligible to get a plaque placed. I find that property owners have been very, very willing to pay $60, $75, $100 to have one of these, to buy one of these plaques to put on their house. So it's obviously it's a standardized plaque with either metal or wood. And once you've got a vendor that's producing these plaques, the application submitted, the commission reviews the application, make sure it's all set, meets the integrity of the criteria, and then they're eligible for a plaque, and they're very willing to pay for that plaque. You can keep going that with more public relations if you have sort of a ceremony, something a article or a photo that can go into the newspaper, the chance to say, oh, the Historic District Commission is providing a new plaque in the community. All right, it is often done by the society or a nonprofit organization. Sometimes it's a little harder for the commission to run these, just because you're dealing with a vendor, you're dealing with funds going in and out in terms of selling. Providing the plaques. But I've seen lots of commissions run them as well.
David M., you had a question?
Everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
David Nedwidak. Also along the plaquing idea, we're having a meeting next week, actually kind of a subcommittee, because we're considering both residential and commercial buildings that may qualify for plaques. And we're looking for a graphic standard of sorts that would reflect the town of South Kingstown, whether through color or type or just design, in each of the plaques, as well as whatever historical information would go on the plaque. I just wondered what you fellows thought about, what experiences you've had with that kind of information on a plaque, and whether that's appropriate or too much information, whether you've had experiences with towns that have done that, where they've included the name of the town or a graphic standard for the town, and then the actual information about the house.
Yeah, so you definitely want to have a standard plaque that everyone sees throughout the whole town. It's going to be a lot more noticeable that way. I think you really can't. It depends on the location of the plaque. So if you were to walk through downtown Boston, you'd see these wonderful plaques. They're green. They have the name, the date of construction, and then they've got a paragraph or two about the site, the building there. But that's because you're right on the sidewalk and you can read it that way. Lots of the local historic districts I'm thinking about, you would never be able to read it unless you got into the bushes, you know, at the front of the house. So you really got to stick with a big large date and the name, the historic name, and just leave it at that, I think, in a lot of cases. I have actually I can send you examples of some plaque programs of what they look like. I think I might even have some examples of the applications themselves. So I can look for that if you'd like.
Yeah, and happy to provide some of those as well, because there's a broad variety of approaches that I've seen across the country in terms of how they do that, in terms of too much information, too little information. One thing I would encourage you, I mean, part of this is branding. You know, you want this to be proliferated around the community and everyone sees it. This is the feel good thing that you can offer, which, you know, you're looking for those things. But also make sure your name's on there somewhere, or that's provided by, so that people start associating these plaques with you guys. And they don't just assume it's the Historical Society or some other group. I mean, if that's in partnership or they're doing it, that's fine. But this is an opportunity potentially, if you guys are sponsoring the program, that they start associating a feel-good thing with you all, which probably right now they just think of you as the regulator, and you're trying to move them beyond that.
That's actually really timely. One of the things we're talking about is possibly changing the name of the Historic District Commission to something like the Heritage Commission, something that would be an overarching umbrella that would cover the entire town. And the other thing, and that I would love to hear what your opinion on that. The other thing is, we've talked about a tax credit potentially. And that I see that as something that could be really a positive for public relations if we are able to actually do that and get it passed through the town. And also your thoughts on that would be helpful. Thanks.
I can go, Adrian, or you want to go? You want to go first? Or either one's fine with me.
I can go first. Yeah, the name change could be interesting. I mean, I know of some commissions that are referred to, like you all, as historic district commissions, which is a very narrow kind of prescriptive approach, because sometimes that's how they started. They were just associated with the district, and they weren't thinking about the broader community reach or you know, potential. So some are called historic preservation commissions, some are historic cultural and preservation commissions, so that you're bringing in the cultural side of things, which, so that people aren't just thinking it's not just about the architecture, but it's also about the, you know, broader than that in terms of the work that you do. So I don't have an answer necessarily, the right answer about, you know, whether you call yourself the Heritage Commission, but I do think there is some value in expanding beyond this notion that you're just the Historic District Commission. Again, it kind of sets you up to be that we're just regulating this one boundary area and we don't care about anything else. So I think there's some value in terms of branding and just your outreach. The other question about tax credits, maybe I don't know if you're talking about tax credits or maybe tax abatements. They're two different things. Is it more tax abatement? Okay. Great program if you can, you know, you can offer that as an incentive. We have that in California. It's a California state enabling law, and then cities adopt into it, which I know Massachusetts has something similar to that, or in some others it's a little different, I guess, what Massachusetts have, but other cities and states offer it. So if you have the ability to offer a tax abatement, it can be a powerful incentive. So in you know, in our case, if a designated property wants to take advantage of a tax abatement, they could get a property tax reduction of anywhere maybe 30% up to 60% on their annual liability. That so it adds up. Our program is called the Mills Act, which I'm happy to send you more information on. It's a very specific kind of prescriptive program that people opt in, and then they're in a contract with the local government in exchange for designation and ensuring that they're actually protecting their property and they're reinvesting in it in exchange for that cost savings on their tax liability. So it's something that you're going to have to probably talk with, depending on where your taxes go, school districts and other folks that may not be so supportive because they see it as a drain. So it's a process, again, of building the support for enabling that kind of program. But as an incentive, it can be really powerful, encouraging people to want to designate and to see more value in it other than just the protection and regulation.
Dave Hill. again, and just to follow up to Adrian's comments there, a contextual statement. Our historic district abuts is right next to the University of Rhode Island, and we have a significant graduate student housing shortage, and as such, probably more than we really realize, the historic properties are used for student housing, and the owners could live anywhere in Pennsylvania or whatever. So it's an income thing. So the motivation for upkeep and maintenance is probably not where it would be. So I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about how we could perhaps partner with a major university next door that's using our historic resources for student housing.
All right. Let me think about that one for a minute there. And Adrian, if you want to think about it too, I'll just go back and talk about the name change and the tax credit, and then we'll think about partnering with the university on housing issues. The name change is interesting, and I'm just going to describe a little how things work in Massachusetts. We have local historical commissions in Massachusetts, and we have local historic district commissions in Massachusetts, which I think is fairly unique, that you could have both of these within one municipality. So for the town of Hingham, they have a Hingham Historical Commission, and they have a Hingham Historic District Commission. Newton, the city of Newton outside Boston, has the Newton Historical Commission, and then they've got a Historic District Commission for each of their historic districts. So they've got an Auburndale Historic District Commission, a Newtonville Historic District Commission, just like a South Highlands Historic District Commission. They've got about 5 different preservation-related commissions in the city. And the idea is that the historical commissions are more community-wide preservation planning. They do things like the survey, they do more community-wide outreach, education, they do more things like National Register nominations. And it's the district commissions that really just do the design review within the local historic district. There's positives and negatives to doing this with 2 different commissions. I mean, one of the big negatives is it's hard to get a pool of volunteers to serve on two different commissions in a community. So over time, a number of commissions that had a local historical commission and a historic district commission have combined over time, just because it was easier to, it was almost a little bit easier in the public's eyes to have one commission doing both tasks, community-wide preservation planning and design review in a local historic district. And also because the pool of applicants just was hard to get for 2 different commissions. Downside of that is that once they combined, I found that the commission would often just focus on design review because their regulatory aspect of their work. There is time challenge there. They've got deadlines under the ordinance, and community-wide historic preservation planning would just completely fall off. With some commissions not even the number of commissions I worked with that were combined wouldn't even know what the word survey meant. It was like they didn't. 20 years had gone by since anyone had been on the commission that had done any survey, and it got lost over time. So that's the downside, is when you go from being design review to trying to take on this other role. It's a lot. It may be a lot to take on. But I think lots of benefits as well, because you're really one commission in the town doing all of that. As long as you can do both roles of design review in the local historic district and think community wide, great. So Heritage Commission is one. That's a term that's used a lot in New Hampshire. It's not used at all in Massachusetts, and I haven't seen it much outside of Massachusetts to call it a Heritage Commission. Lots of them are called preservation commissions. That cover both. And yeah, if you have the word district in your commission name, and you're really thinking about how you can focus on historic preservation planning throughout the whole community, yeah, I think a name change is a really good idea. On the tax credit issue or the tax abatement issue, yes, we have something like that in Massachusetts. First thing to find out is talk to your counsel, your attorney for legal advice on this. You probably can't do it unless there's some sort of state law that allows you to offer an abatement like that. Usually state law is going to say cities and towns can't create their own sort of tax structure that's going to be all very, very well defined under state law. So don't spend too much time on that unless you find out what's possible in Rhode Island. We do have one in Massachusetts like this. It doesn't seem to work very well. So whatever you do, don't follow Massachusetts' lead on how to do a tax abatement for local preservation projects. I can talk more about that in a bit if you wanted to hear more about why I don't think ours is working very well. Okay, Adrian, did you come up with any thoughts on partnering with universities?
I do. It's a great question, David, kind of the perennial town hall debate and how to build relationships between those two institutions. And I can think of a couple examples of how things have developed. It's kind of similar to hospitals too. Those hospitals and universities are not always the best neighbors to historic districts or historic neighborhoods. They kind of gobble them up. And so you have to build those relationships. So it's like a very specific outreach strategy developed just for those instances. But I can think of a couple things. So UPenn in Philadelphia always had this issue where all the buildings surrounding the university were student housing falling into disrepair. There was no incentive to take care of them. Great historic housing stock. So in that case, UPenn, after many negotiations and conversations with the community, they actually created an incentive program. So if you worked for the university, you would get a chunk of dollars that you could go towards purchasing a house in the neighborhood. You had to live within a catch area surrounding the university, but it encouraged people that worked at the university to reinvest and live in close proximity. And it was a huge success in terms of that program. So they actually turned the neighborhood around. You still have the issue of you need to provide student housing, but that was another discussion about how do you do that in a way that's actually housing that meets codes and it's where students actually should be living versus in conditions that they shouldn't be. So that was a good program. We have the same issue with USC in Los Angeles. We have historic districts abutting the campus, and the campus keeps growing. And we've got housing providers that are specifically tearing down historic homes to build multifamily, essentially dormitories for students. There are these big kind of cereal boxes that are being inserted into the historic neighborhoods left and right. That's one challenge that we're trying to deal from a land use that is allowing for that. The other thing is that because of relationships there, USC has actually created some funds so that they actually provide funding for a survey. They've done some funding to move historic buildings that were at risk. Again, it's a relationship that's developed over time, but they're actually understanding that they're causing an impact and they're providing some funding to help offset that. So it's about outreach and relationships with the university and helping them hopefully understand that they have a responsibility here. Hope that helps.
Cool. Thanks, Adrian.
We've got about a minute or two before we move on to the next one. Do we have any other burning?
So I have a question
Yeah.
about design standards and how you all are feeling in the real world in your professional careers about rigidity of the Secretary of Interior standards and whether softening them would be beneficial. I'm particularly concerned about where we stand on some issues such as windows. We're very strict on windows. And I'm just looking ahead at Kingston seems to be all right at the moment. There seems to be an understanding because we have 18th century and early 19th century dwellings that people do tend to to think of as being kind of sacred in a sense. And so they're willing to accept the really rigid standards. But outside of that area, or even on the properties that are more recent in the district, I think we're going to find that there's a sort of a growing kind of feeling that we should bend on the particularly for windows, and I think maybe for siding coming down the road. We have a lot of local contractors who are not historic preservation contractors, and of late they've been getting into, of course, the AZEC and the PVC siding materials, cement board, and also a new vinyl, which is in shingles. They're producing now individual vinyl shingles that look very much like real wood shingles, except they never deteriorate, or they deteriorate, but they never go gray. They never weather out. But I just see this as a future. What do you think about that? How is that going where you're experiencing either consulting or design review?
I'll go ahead and start. So for the Secretary of Interior standards, the word that often gets local commissions a little concerned is the word shall, because you read through the Secretary of Interior standards and it's shall. It sounds very restrictive, very very regulatory coming across that way. And yet partly it's good to remember where the Secretary of Interior standards come from. Those are really coming from a place of, we're not going to give you a federal grant unless you meet these standards. We're not going to give you a federal investment tax credit unless you're meeting these standards. And so that's why they can come across that way. And that goes back decades. I mean, that's really where the standards really come out of National Park Service in the 1970s, trying to say, we're going to give out these grants, but we got to make sure our public funds are being well utilized. One thing in terms of, if your concern is actually related to the Secretary of Standards directly, I had this come up with a set of design guidelines that I was working on with a city in Connecticut as a consultant, and I wanted to make sure the Secretary of the Interior standards were actually included within the design guidelines, so that they were adopted by the city. They had specific guidelines for local design guidelines, but the actual national generalized guidelines for the treatment of properties were actually adopted as well as part of the city's guidelines. A commission member had a lot of concerns about that being in there like that because of the word shall. And they just kept saying it sounds too much of a requirement there. What we ended up doing was actually pulling off some language from the National Park Service themselves and explaining what the standards actually mean, and explaining that there is meant to be flexibility to the standards that way. So when you get to the local level and decide, how do we want to review things in terms of specifics, windows, siding, things like that, that's going to be a lot more specific. Partly it's specific to your community and the character defining features of your community, what makes your community a special place. And so you're not going to see any references like that to specific things like that in these national standards. You got to decide at the local level, what's your community standard? Where do you want to fall on this? And some communities might fall on one side of allowing some more alternative substitute kinds of things. It's not where I would like to see things go, but that's their local choice. I mean, it is local guidelines that they are adopting, and that's what they've decided is their community standard. So you can think about it that way. You could also think about it that there's ways that you can have some of these alternative materials included in your local historic district, but only in certain places, maybe on an addition. but not necessarily on the facade. Maybe the facade and the main elevations that are visible from the public way need to retain their natural materials, but maybe there's a place for fiber cement board on an addition. So you can work in some flexibility that way as well. Windows, I think, including within your design guidelines, that there really is an interest in protecting historic wood windows, and making that clear is good. But again, it's going to be your community standard. I think it's just important to recognize what one person's indication of what a window is that's beyond repair is may very well be repairable and is going to last another 100 years if done correctly, as opposed to needing a replacement window in the next 15 to 20.
I would just add, Rich, we do, NAPC does, one of our segments is on alternative materials or substitute materials. And in some ways we break down some examples of how different communities are treating this, you know, because there is, as Krista said, there's no one standard. What flies in Charleston might not be at all something that Philadelphia would accept, or vice versa, you know, the way they've established it. So you might tune into one of those at some point, because we really do break it down into windows and siding and roofing materials and you name it, because there's always a new product that's coming online, and they're certainly better than they have been in the past. You know, 10 years ago, there probably wasn't a lot that you could even look to in terms of substitute window materials that you maybe even would pass muster. Now some do, and they're even eligible for tax credit projects, but it still is about the process in which, how do you arrive at that decision that a replacement product is deemed viable versus repair. The standards, I think, you know, they're very general, very flexible, depending on how they're interpreted, as you know. And I think the other piece to this is, and Chris alluded to it, is for communities that just rely on the standards and don't have design guidelines that go deeper. That's where I think real problems are, because they are so general. They're flexible, but they're so general, and interpretation, they can be very subjective too, depending on the circumstance. So if you're just relying on those in isolation, that's a problem. And then lastly, I would say, you're asking kind of like real world. I think preservation is kind of shifting, in my opinion, to some degree, that we need to be a little bit more flexible, and maybe in certain circumstances, not so precious. It's just the reality, especially when we're talking about things like housing. You know, if windows are the, you know, the stumbling block, but you're providing housing or rehabbing a building, you know, is that the most important thing to focus in on? So these are all kind of case-by-case decisions. We're dealing with things like background buildings. They fall through the cracks because they're not important enough to be individual landmarks. They're in isolation, so they're not in a district, but they're fabric. We want to keep them. So we may have to accept larger additions to them to keep that kind of fabric of these background buildings. So I think a lot of what we're doing, and probably we need to embrace more as a field, is sort of some imperfect preservation, and thinking kind of the pros and cons that come with that. But every community needs to decide what they do, and how they approach that. With that, let's shift over to where I start, because I think a lot of this conversation is going to continue in terms of what we're talking about. And it's a really good, rich conversation that we've been having in terms of some of these issues and challenges with outreach. So can you all see the screen or the slide? Okay, I see thumbs up. Okay, so I'm going to take it, kind of build off Chris, and also what we did in person in October, and dig deeper, thinking about, okay, maybe beyond the historic district, what are some approaches that you might look to? All with this idea, again, that we've all started with, that, you know, there's about 3,500 preservation commissions or historic district commissions or cultural heritage commissions, whatever you want to call yourself, that exist across the country, but they all have one thing in common, that they're plagued with the misconceptions that, you know, everyone paints commissions from one place to the next with the same broad brush, that again, you're against progress, you're about stopping things, you're probably elitist, that you're against private property rights, and you're stuck in the past, you're a regulator, all these common tropes, they come out and they probably will never go away. So that's, again, what you're up against, but I think we've got some ideas about how to deal with that. Just as a reminder, this again is my background. Like I said, I've always worked with commissions, even though I've mostly been in the nonprofit sector. So I've been on a commission for like 5 or 6 years for a city county commission. I've been staffed to commissions all at once, where I was serving probably 5 or 6 communities at one time, being their staff support, usually smaller towns. And then mostly in my current day-to-day is I am going before a commission or commissions, and I'm an applicant where I'm trying to get a nomination through, or I'm supporting, or maybe not supporting a nomination, or trying to get the expanded period of significance or whatever it might be. So my work has always been in this kind of field. So I understand your pain in terms of making the case for outreach. But again, it's probably one of the most important jobs that you'll have to do. These are 4 things I would say that just keep in mind that I think we're touching on, that you can be you're inherently reactive as a body, that you're established, but that doesn't mean you can't be proactive too. There's a balance and there's a fine line. You're not going to jump into advocacy, but you can be proactive. I think some of the things I'm going to show are probably going to push you or encourage you to step out of your comfort zone. And I think that's the whole idea of comfort zone, is it's comfortable to stay there. But if you grow and change and expand your reach, you're probably going to get a little uncomfortable. And that's part of outreach as well. The other idea is that the work that you do around outreach, it's not a one-time thing. Like the plaque program, you need to be doing that over many, many years before you're probably going to see a critical mass and a difference. Or if you're wanting to get your town council on board, it's not going to happen with one meeting. It's going to happen with a lot of meetings, taking them to lunch, getting to know them, getting to know where they live, do they like old buildings, whatever. It's going to be a sustained long-term approach before you're going to see the real reward. And then lastly is effective outreach means you've got a lot of audiences. So it could be the realtors you're going to focus in on, or maybe it's the property owners and you're going to do the plaque program, or maybe against your elected officials. You've got to figure out which audience is going to be your top priority, but knowing that you have many audiences you can choose from. And then the payoff, again, or the reward is, after you do this and you've been doing it for some time, it's going to make your job a lot easier, because it's all cyclical. Just like we were talking about the code enforcement. If you've got good outreach, you're probably going to have less code violations. And if you don't, you're going to probably have more, and then you're going to stumble in terms of how to deal with that. And then 3 things I'd like to cover in the next hour, again, not me just all talking, but the idea of, again, how do you expand your reach? You probably want to save, preserve more places, is my guess. So that's probably, how do you get out of your bounds of just the district? So we're going to talk about that, and that's going to definitely push you out of your comfort zone, I'm guessing, and maybe you're not comfortable going in some of the places I'm gonna throw out there. It's also the idea of your relationships and how you build support for your outreach. It's not just external. It's not just the property owners or the realtors. It's the people inside town hall. So as Chris was mentioning, it's your building department, it's your elected officials. If you don't have good relationships there, it's really hard to make to get your job done. And then lastly, we're going to talk a bit about, what do you do here? What are your next steps? What's your first step? So setting your intention, developing a roadmap, and then how do you implement it? Because we can throw out all kinds of ideas, and Chris and that fact sheet that he's going to get to you has wonderful ideas, but you still have to actually do it, which is the hard part. And we have limited numbers of people that can actually do it. So we're going to talk about all those kinds of things. I want to start back here. I did this a little bit at the workshop in October, but I'm going to just remind you again and kind of flip the switch a little bit and think about, again, I started with, and we talked about earlier on, all the misconceptions about what you are and how you're about change, you're about you hate progress, and you don't like change, and all those kinds of things. That's what people think you're about. Flip the switch and think about what's your worth. what's your value that you offer. In some ways, this could be the thinkings of what's your elevator pitch. When you're talking to somebody in the community and they say, oh, I know what you guys are. You tell people they can't, replace their windows in the district. Well, here's what you actually do. You ensure that important buildings and places in the neighborhood aren't lost needlessly. You help guide people so that they don't do things that are harmful to the character of the community, and you find ways in which they can still accomplish these goals, whatever they might be in these three examples here. So you're providing a service there. You also ensure that bad things don't happen in your community. And if you're going to show any pictures, go to another community. Don't show them from your own community in terms of, these bad images. So this is an example of David. This is USC. These are some of the student housing that's being produced in the historic neighborhood surrounding the university. Clearly not a great fit in terms of new infill and, matching character. But if you had that protected, or you had some controls there, or some tools and outreach, you probably have a better outcome than this. You also have the ability, and this is a huge thing in terms of the value and your worth that you provide to communities, is you can help people envision what things could be where other people can't see it. We can look at an old building and go, oh yeah, this could be this, you do this, here's how you can accomplish it. Most people don't have the ability to visualize. You provide that service, again, in that example or in this example. And you also show how you can add on to a building, you can expand it in a way so you're not freezing places in time. Again, you're kind of making the pitch about what you bring to the table. Perfect example, we talked about this in October. One of these houses went through design review, one house did not. They both wanted to accomplish the same thing. They wanted more square footage. Reasonable. People want bigger houses than what was built in the 1930s in these two examples. This one went through design review. They did it in a way that fits better. Again, you provided the service to help guide them to get there. This one clearly didn't, and it doesn't work as well, or it doesn't work at all in this particular case in terms of adding square footage. Two other examples, same kind of thing. Again, shows that you're flexible. You're allowing people to add on, expand houses, do the great room or the big kitchen or whatever it might be that they want. But again, it's part of your case. You also allow for creative and innovative approaches. So we're talking about the standards. This is probably a standards compliant project that allows for adaptive reuse of this industrial building for an entirely new community use. Again, a very progressive kind of approach that most people maybe think that you wouldn't approve. You could. So again, you allow for buildings to take on new uses. And then lastly, I would say in terms of this, like thinking about what's your worth and keeping it front and center so that you're not just thinking of what people think you're about, but telling people what you actually do. In this case, you help ensure that housing is maintained, historic housing. Housing is everything's conversation today is about the cost of housing. And so in this case, you're ensuring that historic housing, probably relatively affordable housing is maintained. If you lose the building, you lose the housing. So they're inextricably linked. So again, you're relevant to pressing issues of the day. So just keep those in mind, I would say. The other aspect here I would go and talk about is when you're talking about expanding your reach, this gets where the rubber hits the road. Either you have some people that get what you do and care, and then you have other people that don't. So how do you convert those people to care more? You can do that. There will still be some people that will never be on board, and that's okay. You're not going to convince everyone that they should be a preservationist or support the work of preservation. So I'm guessing the three people that put up these signs or the signs that Chris showed, they're probably not going to be easily convertible into preservationists at some point in the future, is my guess. So try, but don't get mired into this case. The other aspect is this: if you start getting out of your comfort zone, maybe it is talking about a different district, maybe it is talking about individual properties that you may want to designate in the future, which we'll talk about a little bit more. Realize that it's not going to be easy. It's not going to happen quickly. Things will fall into the kind of the limbo status because it's politics. But you have the ability to keep things moving in terms of this. So it's a process in terms of that. It doesn't happen quickly. It's the long game in terms of this. The other piece to this is you have a role to be the counterpoint. So you can clear up misconceptions and the ideas of what people think you're about through our variety of tools and strategies, and set the record straight. Both saying, you know, this is what we provide in terms of the value, but what you think is wrong, or what's being said is incorrect, and here's why. So we talked about this before, preservation myths, or the idea of pre-bunking before they are already off and running in the community. Many commissions across the country have these posted on their website. I don't know if you guys do or not, in terms of the common myths about what this work is or what people think you're about. And here's the reality. So I would encourage you to get ahead of things before people start believing these things or taking a life of their own. Also, here's again the proactive piece. You have the ability to be proactive, but there's limits, and there's also the potential for partners in terms of this process. So 3 examples. This case, you've got Historic Tyler's working to consider a new neighborhood for their next historic district of modernist 50s, 60s houses. They have a partner there. I understand that may be a challenge for you guys. I saw in the survey, it looks like the South County History Center might be somebody, although they seem to be moved away from preservation to some degree, it sounds like. But how do you cultivate, build a partnership there, or think about maybe there's a new group that might come together, maybe it's a committee, who knows? But thinking about you can't do the advocacy, but that's where you need a partner. That's the work I do as a nonprofit. That's where I work closely with local governments to do this side of the work that they can't do. But that doesn't mean there's not a relationship. So they help me understand where they are, where their stumbling blocks are. Do they have, you know, council support? And then I'll go, okay, here's a situation. Now I know what I need to do. So it's a relationship in terms of that. So thinking about who you can maybe cultivate in terms of some partners to help you do this work. It's also the idea in this particular case, a city that's talking about a potential historic district, they're very clearly explaining out how. So that's the ability that you have, again, to explain what this does, what it doesn't do, in terms of the benefits in this particular case of an historic district. And in this case, great. You know, in Spokane, they've passed a recent new historic district, all about community outreach. So if you can read that, in this particular case, they garnered 56.1% of the property owners that voted in support of the new historic district. That's pretty close to the margins. Maybe you're not comfortable with it being that close. Maybe you want to have more support than that. Some cities, you know, establish some thresholds in terms of what they want, in terms of support before a measure moves forward for a local historic district. But again, they got overwhelming, not overwhelming, majority support in this particular case to be able to move forward. That didn't happen without a lot of outreach beforehand. And it takes time to get to that. So I want to move to a couple of maybe case studies in terms of this conversation. And this is one with the kind of path of least resistance. So, or the low-hanging fruit. Think about those first. I'll ask a question here. This is in the town of Mishawaka, Indiana, small town. Well, it's about a town of 46,000 population. This is the downtown. There is an historic landmark in this picture. Is anyone aware of what it is, or can point it out to me? I'm going to call on you, Murray. What is it?
Unmuting. The clock.
It's the clock. Good guess, and you're accurate. So this is the historic landmark in downtown Mishawaka. I think it may still be the only historic landmark, local historic landmark in the town, in the downtown. This is where I first started in preservation, working for this city. I was only there for a year, and they had passed an ordinance, and my job, I kind of just pushed my way into it because no one else wanted to be staffing the Preservation Commission. And so we need to get started, and we had to start somewhere. So we thought about, okay, what's the low hanging fruit? Where is what resources can we start with that people will not oppose in any possible way? And so we started with the clock. Everyone loves the clock. It was a no-brainer. It's designated. Did we make a huge impact? No. But this clock then led to the next landmark and the next landmark, and then ultimately led to them passing a local historic district that we worked in. Only, I think, 10 properties. We were able to get 8 of the 10 owners in support, and ultimately we got it passed. So it's like you got to start somewhere. So figure out in your community, if you were to do this and you wanted to designate individual sites, you have that ability in your ordinance. A historic district can be a single site or it can be multiple properties. What are the no-brainers? What's your equivalent of the Will's clock in your town that maybe you could get everyone to rally around and support? So that's one idea I would throw out to you to start thinking about what might be something you could do in your community. Again, it starts getting people seeing, other resources that may then be elevated to being historic. Another approach you might look at, again, hopefully it's a path of least resistance. You in your community, and certainly many other communities, municipal owned buildings are often historic buildings, or some of them are historic buildings. Walking the talk, theoretically, if you have a preservation ordinance, you should be willing as a municipality to designate your historic buildings if you're allowed. Some don't allow that, depending on how it's structured. This is a case where we just designated the Watts City Hall and Engine Company. It's in Los Angeles, but it's in the Watts neighborhood. It sailed right through. We had no opposition to it in this particular case. It's now protected, and it's in future. It's not used by the city anymore, so it's something we actually wanted to achieve protection for, because we'll probably need it in the future in terms of what use might come next. So again, think about that. It's again another way to get the municipalities to demonstrate, or the local government to demonstrate to property owners to say, okay, we're willing to do this. How about you? It shows a real commitment to preservation if you can get the historic buildings that the local community, the town, owns and operates to also follow the same rules that you're asking private citizens to do. And then lastly is look for the easy marks. So these are the people in your community that already care, that are already preserving their historic houses, maybe outside of the historic district. They're restoring them, they're rehabilitating, they care about them. Maybe it's not a modern 1960s house like this, or it's a Victorian, whatever style house it might be. But these are people that have already shown a commitment that they care about these properties, and they probably know at some point they're gonna leave. In one way or another, they are. We all do. And they probably want to ensure that their properties that they love are going to be preserved for the future. So work with them. It's going to be one-on-one conversations with them, convince them. Maybe it's one of you that has a historic house already, to see if you'd be willing to do local landmark designation as the process is afforded to you in your ordinance, and to again demonstrate the commitment that you care about preservation. In this particular case, I am the easy mark. This is my house. So I am the person that I'm already obviously biased, and I care about preservation, and I'm working on a local landmark nomination for my house right now. But there are many of me out there that probably no one has ever had the conversation with and said, would you consider designating your building? It's really important what you've done, and we don't want to see it lost, in the future. So think about, again, the low-hanging fruit, again, the path of least resistance in terms of doing this work. I would also throw out, think about other tools other than the typical regulatory approaches that you might have right now afforded to you through your ordinance, and thinking about some even old tools and thinking how that might be used. So this is a project I'm working on right now, a neighborhood called Lamert Park. It's about 2,000 properties, 20s, 30s, Spanish style houses. Really fantastic neighborhood that's imminently at risk through terrible infill and tear downs and whatnot, and the neighborhood's concerned. They tried to become a local historic district at least twice, and they failed, in part due to their own outreach efforts that were very unsuccessful. So what they're doing now is pursuing National Register status, historic district status for the neighborhood. sort of as a gateway that maybe in the future it'll lead to local designation. And I think we've all seen this in communities all over the country that sometimes you can't get the support for local. And so it's easier to sell, more palatable to go for national register first, and maybe local will follow later on in terms of an outreach strategy. This is something you guys can still be doing. You may not have regulatory authority over it, but you can certainly be promoting and trying to help them get to the national register status. Again, it's starting to build the presence and understanding that there's more historic in this community than just the historic district that you guys cover right now. The other unique aspect in Los Angeles is that most places National Register listing provides no protection. It's honorific, it's great, but it doesn't do anything about saving buildings or having a design review process. In Los Angeles, that's different. So in our code, if you are listed on the National Register, there is some limited design review that's afforded. It's not as onerous as if you're a local historic district. So in this particular case, it may be more sellable to go with National Register in knowing that there's some limited protection available. But in this particular case, it all centers around outreach. So as I talked before, walking the talk. I'm walking the talk with the community here. As we did neighborhood tours and explaining what this means, what it does, what it doesn't do. Also, this gentleman is the head of our preservation program in Los Angeles. He's also walking the talk. He's willing to come out on a Saturday. Could be one of the commissioners even. Could be one of you doing this with a neighborhood group. This is the main leader of the effort to go through the neighborhood, to stop and look at houses, talk about, okay, what does this mean if we are to become a National Register district in this particular case for windows? Because again, LA will regulate some design review in this particular instance, and explaining what that means so people can understand and hopefully get on board. It's also been a result of many, many Zoom town hall meetings, which is a great tool that we haven't always used in preservation, that now we're all using it for everything, including this program. We could be doing that to engage people in neighborhoods more effectively. And this has been many Zooms that we've been doing with residents in the neighborhood where they're asking questions, we're answering them, and it's been a really good interactive process to get people on board. These are all the various Zooms that we've done and more than that in the community to help them understand. And so we've been doing this over about 1.5 years. So it's the long game to build support and understanding, answer questions. And then about a month ago, we put it out for a vote in the neighborhood to say, okay, we've done all this outreach. Where are you guys? Do you want to pursue this or not? And the neighborhood community is very cognizant. They don't want just 56%. They want overwhelming support because they don't want to force this on anybody. And so they've gotten 92%. That would not have happened without doing those neighborhood walks and doing these Zoom town halls and doing all of this outreach. We would have never started with 92%. We probably would have maybe had 2% to start with if we were lucky. So that's effective, and they'll probably move forward now with this program, and it will have some protection and some meaning in terms of this community. So let me shift to, those are more of the feel-good things. This is where I'm going to probably push into the area that may be outside the comfort zone. So bear with me. And this is the idea that sometimes it's important enough to work to designate a place that maybe won't have owner consent. It just, you won't have it. But because the place is so significant, it's worth it. And it's important enough to do that. So we can talk more about this, but these are 3 examples of different communities across the country. We do it actually a lot in where I'm at, because it's just the nature of the beast, that you sometimes have an owner that doesn't care about the property, or they have intentions that aren't preservation minded, or we just need to find a new buyer or steward that will do the right thing, but you need to protect it first before it's lost. So there's 3 examples. I'll share a couple examples of how this plays out, or how it has played out. I shared this in October. This is a house we worked to have it landmarked. The owner was not in support at the beginning. We worked with them and we got them to neutral. So that's a win. They weren't completely opposed, but it was important enough to preserve this in terms of its cultural history, not architectural. It's a very important house talking about African-American architect who's experienced living here for 30 years, racial covenants. You know, there's a lot of really important stories embedded in this house. We were successful in designating it. That ultimately led to them putting it on the market for sale, not as development, which is where they started. We found a new buyer. So this guy and this guy stepped forward, purchased the house, and they purchased it because it's historic, because of its story and its association with this Black architect. And that's why they're doing this. They're not going to make money off of this. They'll probably break even if they're lucky, but they're motivated because the house was so important. If we had not designated it against owner consent, we would not have gotten to this outcome. So the house is now saved. It's currently being rehabilitated. It's going to be a great kind of feel-good story to tell this broader story about this person and experience. A nice outcome. The designation afforded us to get to that. This is another example of a bungalow court. We have a lot of these out in California, but think of some of the other kind of beloved multifamily housing you have on the East Coast. The owner here wanted to demolish this, put up a large-scale condo building. Neighborhood did not want that. It was identified as potentially historic through a survey. Ultimately, the city initiated designation on this themselves, and it was designated over a long period of time against the owner's wishes. And then it went through a long period of time trying to find a new owner and to get it in the right hands. So over 8 years, so sometimes it takes a while, we were able to get a new owner in place here. So it's now all preserved, finishing up a full rehabilitation. Landscaping's going in about 30 days. It'll be returned to being the bungalow court that it started off as housing. It's a great win-win. But again, if we didn't have the ability to designate this against the owner's wishes, we would not have this result. So sometimes you need to go there, and sometimes it feels uncomfortable, and you need a whole outreach strategy to get there. But it is about how do you move beyond and protect more places. And sometimes it is doing designation, even if you don't have consent. I would not suggest that you start there. I would start with the easy stuff. Figure out what are the easy places, the low-hanging fruit that you've got in your community right now to think about, that you can have the easy wins before you start moving to the more controversial items. You know, establish yourself more before you go there. This goes to the whole issue we talked about before. You have many audiences. Realtors should be up on this list as well, Rich. So all these people are people that you probably need to be engaging. You probably need, again, prioritize which ones are you going to start with. I'm guessing this is a big one. You need to have support from your town council to fully support what you're trying to do. Same goes for property owners. So figuring out who's the audience that matters the most to you right now. What's your outreach strategy you're going to develop to get to them and build support? It could be the realtors, and then you're going to develop a program, a training program, or a workshop, whatever it might be, or you're going to list the NAPC to help you do that through the program that we offer. But think through that. Again, you can be creative, you can have fun with this. Here's a workshop helping people understand what does local landmarking mean. Here's how you go through the process. We'll work with you. How do you write an architectural description? How do you describe your house? You know, make it fun, engaging, and bring people on board, again, the feel-good side of the work that you do. These are some of the things similar to Chris's example: scavenger hunts, 1950s ride in a 1950s neighborhood, a garden tour, all feel-good outreach things. You can partner with a lot of different groups to do this. A garden group, it doesn't have to be a historic preservation advocacy organization. It could be with PTA. It could be all kinds of groups to do these kinds of things. Again, you're in partnership. So you don't have to be leading these, but you could be doing these, again, feel-good kinds of things. We talked about plaques. Here's a great feel-good thing. They're unveiling the plaques with the owners at their commission meeting, and they're getting photos. What's the one thing that they messed up on their plaques here that we talked about? Anybody, Chris, or anybody seeing it? Please point it out. Anyway.
No organization.
Yeah, they're not getting any payoff from this. You know, people put this plaque up and then no one has any clue of like where it came from, who did this, who sponsored this. So they kind of messed up there, but good intentions. So don't do that. But again, look for these feel-good things, and bring people together, and they're all excited, they're all smiling, and then after they get their plaque up, start talking to them about local landmarking. It's a 1-2 punch kind of thing. Think about how you can do this. Chris mentioned this too. Find ways to get good press. What do you do? A preservation awards program? Or you partner with a nonprofit, or you co-sponsor it? Whatever. Easy ways to get your name in coverage in a way that is not talking about what you're stopping someone from doing, but instead you're celebrating and acknowledging good work that's happening in your community. Also, look for ways to explain the process, make it more user-friendly. So these are, there's infinite ways to do this, but these are 3 examples from Annapolis, Western New York, and San Antonio that all do different ways to help kind of break down the process so it's easy for people to understand in terms of what they do. Same goes if you are doing your design review and C of A process, again, making it very transparent, easy for people to understand when the meeting is, what's happening, what's proposed, that kind of process. And then let's shift lastly to kind of setting your intention and building your kind of roadmap, so to speak, in terms of how do you implement these ideas. I mean, one thing you could be doing is an annual report that kind of outlines what you're already doing, but also what you intend to do, so people understand this. It also could fit very much into what Chris was saying around a newsletter. So it's really clear, communicating the work that you're doing, or in this case, this community, they're doing historic preservation 101 workshops. They're doing a series of those in the community. There's lots of different things you could be doing in terms of just building awareness and understanding about the work that you do. The other piece to this is, which it looked like it fits into some of the goals that you have in the comp plan, is expanding your understanding of what you even have in your community. So in this case, Wilmington's doing an updated historic inventory or survey, so that they have a better sense of what exists. There's always a moving timeline. There are always new potential historic resources, but you need to identify them. The other benefit of doing this is you're probably going to find people like this lady and this neighborhood. Again, it's a mid-century ranch neighborhood, but important in terms of their history. They may already care about, but they don't know you exist or that you care about them. Also, you may not know the story here. So it opens by doing survey and other tools, opens your opportunity to have more connection and to identify new audiences that maybe do care and realize that preservation is for them as well. So thinking about that too. We talked about this before a little bit. I see this more on the West Coast and less on the East Coast, but doing historic context statements. So you can break this down in lots of different ways. It's not a survey, but it's breaking it down around the theme. In this case, it's looking specifically at mid-century modern. This one's looking at specifically single-family residential. This one's more broad. You could be looking at African-American history. You could look at women's history in your community, whatever it might be. But these context statements are really powerful in terms of, one, understanding that history, but also being a tool to bring people together to share their stories and for them to understand that you care about their history. So it's really could be very much tied to the cultural side of preservation by doing more of these. It's another really effective tool. And then lastly, this gets back down to where you already are. So you've already outlined amazing goals and some clear actions that you want to do within the comp plan. And I saw things here like you want to revise the subdivision land development regs. I don't know if you've done that already. You want to have more of a relationship with the Economic Development Commission. Do you have that already? Maybe you do, or maybe there's still an opportunity. There was talk about establishing a demolition delay. There's probably going to need some outreach to build support for implementing that kind of thing. You said you wanted to do a plaque program, so clearly you probably should be doing that. It sounds like you're on your way. And wayfinding signage so that people are clear and understanding. I also saw the thing in here about creating incentives. So you talked about the property tax abatement program. And then I also saw something in here about stone walls in the community. So maybe that is your Will's clock. Everyone loves the stone walls, I hope, in the community, and they'd be on board if you maybe designated those as maybe your first single site historic landmark. easy win, hopefully easy win. But again, you got to start somewhere in terms of that. So you already have great ideas. It's just now, how do you put these into motion and what's your roadmap? And I think we started that in October. Hopefully we're digging deeper tonight with what we've offered you. But with that, I'm going to stop talking and again, open it up to all of you and anything that's come up or how we can maybe help you think about what are the next steps? Where do you start? So feel free to start throwing questions at us.
I'll ask a question on what you already told us not to start at, the painful stuff. Not that I think we should start there, but it did bring up an interesting concept, which was unilaterally going in and identifying something as a protected landmark. I didn't think we had the right to do that. Had I known this 5 or 6 years ago, there could have been a great opportunity to leverage that. So maybe with Brian here as well, who understands our legal framework that we have in Rhode Island and South Kingstown, is that a possible tool for us? Is that something that is possible for us? Is there anything that prevents us from doing that?
Yeah, and I will just say, I looked over both your local and
I think Adrian was trying to talk as well, but he was muted.
Oh, I'll be quick, Brian. I was just saying, I looked over the local, ordinance and also the state enabling. I didn't see anything in there. I'm not saying I couldn't have missed something in terms of saying that you can't do owner consent. So it seems like you have the ability, but maybe it's not used very often. But feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, or anything else.
I don't think there's anything that prevents us from doing a landmarking program. Certainly I can tell from my previous experience that, a historic district doesn't have to be any more than a single property. Protecting individual structures, for example, your clock, I think I'd have to take a closer look at, but nothing comes to mind that would prevent us from doing something like that, particularly if it's done with the consent of the owner of the object.
It's particularly the other case that I was wondering about without consent. That sounds so foreign to me. I'd never heard of something like that.
Well, there's nothing in state law that requires the consent of the owner to include even a whole property in a historic district. So you can clearly force a historic district onto property owners, but my understanding is that traditionally that's not been the way it's done. You do, as Adrian has explained, you try to build a consensus in the community and have the buy-in from the beginning. Because the historic district is not going to work unless you have active participation in the district. And if you start off from the get-go with everybody being actively opposed to you, it's going to be very hard to get it off the ground.
Yeah, I can add a few more things to that. So we have lots of single building local historic districts in Massachusetts. We don't really use the term landmark here. It's single building local historic districts under our state law. City of Somerville outside Boston has several hundred single building local historic districts. And some are certainly done with owner consent. Sometimes single building local historic districts are established because the owner has come forward and said, I'm getting old. I'm not going to be living in this house forever, but I restored it and I really care about this building and I want to make sure it's well protected, even if I don't own it. So, hey, Historic District Commission, can you go ahead and move forward on a single building local historic district here? And so it has to go to town meeting or city council in those cases still. But it's the owner's 100% supportive. There's other examples where the owner's not supportive, and sometimes it happens this way. So we have demolition delay, about 150 or so towns in Massachusetts with with demolition delay. And usually that's 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, something like that. It's happened where the owner is filed for demolition, gone through the demolition delay process, and the commission has found the building, it's called preferably preserved is the term that they use. And that sets up the demolition delay. And during the delay period, they go ahead and start the process of establishing a single building local historic district. So the owners, of course, not supportive of this, but it's not up to the owner. It goes to town meeting. I'm thinking of one example in particular for town. Went to town meeting. Town meeting approved the local historic district by the required 2/3 majority vote, and it was a local historic district. It's not up to the owner in this case. And when you think about the Constitution, it doesn't make sense that it would be based on owner consent. The whole idea of an ordinance is that it's based on the public welfare. What is in the interest of the people that live in that town? And so that's the whole idea here, is it's having a place that still has significant historic resources standing in the community is in the public interest. And so that's why owner consent typically, I mean, that's not true nationally, but that's why you often see under state law or under local ordinance that owner consent is not required. It follows right along with the Constitution. So I think what you should do is what Nantucket has done. Okay, so in 1955, the town of Nantucket, which is the island of Nantucket, established 2 small local historic districts. They were the first local historic districts in Massachusetts. In the 1970s, they expanded their local historic district to the entire island. The entire town of Nantucket is a local historic district. And that's what I think you should do for South Kingstown. What do you think? How's that going to go over?
That's an excellent suggestion, Chris. That's super easy.
Yeah, I thought so too. Yeah, I was going for the low-hanging fruit on that one.
I'm seeing all the reaction from everybody that they're thinking that's pretty easy to accomplish. They're ready to go.
Yeah. Well, I bring that up because, of course, that would never happen. It would never fly. Not going to happen at all. And so, how do you think about enlarging, establishing new local historic districts and things like that that are a little more reality based? And I'm going to give you an example of a town that I met with a few years ago. One of the first steps to establish a local historic district in Massachusetts is to appoint what's called a local historic district study committee. And that committee is responsible for looking at the boundaries, writing a report, holding the public hearing, and things like that. So I went out and met with the study committee to talk about the process, what they needed to do, including the report and how the public hearing process was going to work. But I got to the meeting. I asked a question. Okay, who here on the study committee lives in the proposed local historic district? Nobody on the study committee raised their hands. I said, we got one problem here. Okay, who here on the study committee has talked to the residents that live in the proposed local historic district? Again, nobody raised their hands. I then spent the next hour trying to talk them out of doing a local historic district because I knew what was going to happen. They were going to work hard on getting this report done. They're going to have lots of time and energy put into it. And the whole thing was going to go down in flames. And they were all going to walk away really discouraged. And I saw a whole group of energetic historic preservation people around this table. And I said, I'd much rather you go and do those other kinds of feel good kinds of things that both Adrian and I have talked about. Go spend your time on those things like that. Maybe think about a local historic district years from now, but really spend your time just thinking about the plaque programs, the signage, the National Register, all those things. Work on those right now. And then the next part that's really important in establishing local historic districts, new ones in your town, you guys don't have to lead it. don't put that kind of pressure on yourself. It's going to be best, works best by far, really the only way that this works is when it's grassroots. You want to be out there as the informed commission that understands how the process works to establish a local historic district, but you have to do this with local advocates that live in that historic district. They need to be taking the lead. They need to be talking to their neighbors. They need to be the ones holding neighborhood meetings and explaining why they want a local historic district here too. It takes pressure off you. You're the one that can really be the organization that explains how the process works. But keep it as a grassroots process.
Thanks, Chris. Other questions? Or do we just stir the pot with all kinds of ideas to get you thinking?
I have some, we do want to do this landmarking thing, I think, and to get it rolling. I think we have a problem with not really having a grassroots organization that exists. From time to time, they've popped up and tried to exist, but they've become frustrated or didn't continue. So is it low-hanging fruit? I don't think it is, actually, to try to find a grassroots organization or a nonprofit advocate. That's a dilemma that we face. We do have environmental groups. We do have the History Center. The South County History Center is interested in historic buildings, but I think they're unwilling to be a grassroots organization. The grassroots thing sounds good to me on I mean, I know it's a great thing, but it does require a huge amount of effort on the part of the people who are the grassroots organization. So I'm sort of reaching out to you to think out of the box a little bit. Maybe in changing our name, we can become more advocacy oriented. I don't think we can ever get rid of our name as Historic District Commission under state law, but I think we can have maybe an additional name, or maybe we get the council to appoint another commission that we all become members of. It's this Heritage Commission. I just wish there was an easy way to motivate neighborhood organizations in South Kingstown. I think they're motivated by development threat. And I've been thinking that maybe if we are strategic, we sort of understand what the threats may be and jump on the threat bandwagon. But that's dangerous. It's really dangerous too. So I'm kind of at loss. And I've lived in this town since I was 4 years old, if you can believe it, off and on. I haven't been here all that time, but it's a crazy town. It's a town of university brats, and I'm a university brat. It's also a town that shifts its focus from local people to summer people to URI people. It's constantly shifting. And I think it is a town that has a lot of mobility. I think there's a lot of people coming in and leaving. We're also under pressure now, which I understand is growing, of summer home development that's high end, very high end. So we're experiencing a sort of an influx of people who really challenge our affordable housing issues and challenge a lot about who we are, because they're wealthy people and they expect things.
Rich?
So with that,
Yeah, I was just saying, Rich, I'm
maybe that's
sympathetic.
something there between you and Chris, between Adrian and Chris, that's out there that some people try.
Yeah, Rich, and I'll add that we also have homes within South Kingstown that are potentially at risk due to coastal hazards amplified by climate change as well, that we're slowly developing a strategy for preservation for those, and identification of those historic resources that are at risk.
I was just gonna say, Rich, on your point about do we have the grassroots partner to work with? And I'm sympathetic to that, and I do think it's a kind of an essential ingredient to do this work well, because you can't be the advocates as the the local government. It just, there's only so far you guys can go in terms of that role. But my guess, and again, this is the work I've always done, is my guess if you've got people in the community that do care, but maybe no one's talked to them, or maybe like what you did with, I'm not sure who you caught one of your commission members, maybe it was David, and at the fish market to convince him to be on the board. I bet, Rich, there's somebody in your community that you could have a conversation with, and maybe they also know some people that are also concerned about the future, and you could start having some conversations with people. It could start really small in terms of some people that do care. They don't have to be formally organized as a nonprofit yet, but then maybe they would be willing to do some partnering with you. I think the other thing is that you could maybe start with the feel good things. Don't ask for the big lift right away and burn out your people, but maybe even you say you want to do a plaque program, maybe the History Center might be a partner with you on the plaque program, to help put some funding into it, and maybe that would encourage them to get back into the preservation game a little bit more, because everybody's going to want to be part of that. That's feel good 100%. It's visibility. It's you feel good giving something to the property owners. The property owners are happy to get this plaque to put on their house. So I mean, there's some byproduct that could come from that, and use that as kind of a gateway, maybe to get more of a a grassroots group, or to reinvigorate the History Center to be willing to do more. And maybe that's again more one-on-one conversations saying, we need you here. Will you do this for us? And I know you have those relationships that people will probably be willing to do it because you ask them.
Right. I think actually that to go back to that, we have reached out to the History Center, and we hope that they will participate with sort of the research end of it, and also because of the demolition delay ordinance that we're working on, the structure of that, the precedents that we have at other communities throughout the state. We have the enabling law for it, so it's just an easy thing for us to ask for South Kingstown to be part of that enabling law, and then go ahead with a local ordinance. And we're doing that. But one of the thoughts is that we would actually have a list. The other communities in Rhode Island that have such a law have a list of the properties that are important to be considered for demolition delay. And that sort of segues into our landmark list, our potential landmark list. It also segues into our plaquing list. And if we get the History Center to sort of validate the list, the thought is that the third party or the nonprofit or the grassroots, whatever we want to call them, they sort of stand to be the validation agent, the one who says, yes, this is the objective opinion. This list is the important list. This is the list of the important properties. That sort of has been my thought, I think. And if we progress that way, I can see that it's sort of the low-hanging fruit in a way. We're beginning to celebrate more carefully those particular properties, and hopefully we'll find out from the owners once we connect with them in a very, in a very fun way, I hope, their enthusiasm for those buildings. That's what I'm hoping for. And maybe we can be selective. We'll pick the ones that we know that the owners have been enthusiastically upgrading them and restoring or rehabbing them, and that they've done a good job. And it also segues into our awards. We do have a local awards program that we do, and we try to be careful about that as well. So I think that we do have some of these pieces. They're sort of loosely organized that we're working on, but I like your idea of nourishing the the third party, the nonprofit, the partner. In Kingston, we have a great partner. There's a neighborhood organization that was founded in the 19th century in Kingston Village, and they're still alive. It's called the Kingston Improvement Association, and I'm hopeful that we can draw them in to be our sort of the party that pays attention to what we're doing and writes about it favorably. The party that says, oh, we're watching them. We're watching that government agency. We're making sure that they don't screw you up. And we're going to, hopefully have them be our sort of our PR people if we can. That's not easy. We have to work with them on it. And but they hold a fair in Kingston twice a year. They have walking tours when they hold the fair. They have open houses. They do all kinds of things that we could be participating in and helpful on, and we could have more of a relationship with them. So I think that you've inspired us. You really have, because what you've done is you sort of reinforced some of the things we've done, but you've also given us a whole passel of things that we could be doing and get enthusiastic about doing, because we can see good results from those things. So it's been reinforcing. It really has been. Thank you. And I don't want to cut this off because I think other people have things to say too, but I'm very excited, actually. I may sound like I'm falling asleep, but I'm very excited.
That's good to hear. And it sounds like you kind of outlined a kind of a loose roadmap already in terms of how you can proceed and like next steps and who you need to be talking with. We've got about 10 minutes left. So how else can we be helpful? Chris and I, helpful to you to kind of think through next steps or things that we could follow up with if you want more information. Like, we're happy to send you examples of plaque programs or other things like that. Whatever, we're happy to help.
So the plaque program, certainly the landscape districts are another thing that you folks actually inspired. I think October was really lit the fire that since then we've been having conversations about that. So, different examples of how that's been rolled out, I think would be very interesting. And something that Rich said that having led one of these local grassroots organizations that started with great intentions but fizzled, it was, I would say, two things that we recognized that we lacked. One was people to come in and actually do the work. We had some of these fun activities, street fairs, and surveyed a lot of folks. And that all got very vocal, positive response, but getting people to actually be active was difficult. And I think that's true with volunteer organizations everywhere. But then understanding that this organization, in order to get visibility, had to be out there doing more. And some of that doing more required money. It required some type of financing. So understanding where the money is to match the enthusiasm to be able to support some of these programs with a government that's not always willing to shell out money. Having said that, we are in a really interesting circumstance right now where we do have these recovery dollars that are going to potentially help to finance the plaque program. We have another program that's around facades that's been discussed, and we're hoping that if it's a revolving fund, or there's going to be some financing for a facades program, which could be some of these very visible programs that help to put us out there, or put preservation, not us, but to put preservation out in front of the community and get people excited about it.
Those are great. Yeah. Other thoughts or ideas, or?
Might be helpful. Your elevator pitch. I like the 5 steps of how do you respond to somebody who's negative about preservation. If you could send that along, I would love to have that.
Yeah, we're happy to send, I think, I don't want to speak for Chris, but I think we're happy to send a PDF of our slides that you're welcome to. Is that okay, Chris? You're on mute. You're still on mute.
There we go. Yeah, I can send my slides. Did I send you the article that I had, the self-help for preservation advocates that was in the National Alliance newsletter? Was that something that went out? Okay. I actually talk about the escalator pitch in that. So instead of an elevator pitch, I like to think about an escalator pitch. You know, you're going up on the escalator, and somebody's coming down the escalator, and they yell at you, "Why would you want to save that building?" And you got, like, instead of like the 15 seconds in the elevator, you only got 3 seconds. What are you gonna say? And my point on that is, you know your audience so well that you know what they're going to respond to. I see so many benefits from historic preservation, whether it's an environmental benefit, an educational benefit, children benefit, housing. The list goes on and on in terms of the benefits that you get from historic preservation. So if it's the mayor or city council member coming down the stairs and saying, "I want that building gone so we can have more tax dollars," you just gotta, your response is something about really quick in terms of historic preservation being the best way to bring in more money in the community. And it's just so quick, because you know that's what that person's motivation is. So I think another presentation that I do with NAPC is just talking about the importance for local commissions to really listen to what's being said out there. And for those that don't agree with you, learning what makes them tick, what drives them. Is it an environmental interest? Is it an economic interest? Is it a housing interest? And your escalator response is something that just fits perfectly the key for what their concerns are. But anyway, I'll send that article to you as well.
Also, I remember in October, I think I did sign up for the newsletter, but I've not gotten the newsletter. How can I make sure I do that?
Marie, are you still on?
I am here, yes. I'm going to be sending a follow-up email again. I'm sorry if I missed you, but I will definitely make sure that you start receiving member benefits. And I was also going to add, when you were talking about the elevator pitch and how to respond to different, what is the word? Sorry, it's late. But different groups opposing preservation. NAPC is actually working on our advocacy project, and we've been developing a resource that we'll be sharing soon. Right now it's in its draft stages, and we're actually looking for people to take a look at it and volunteer and give us feedback, and we put it out on our listserv. So once you're all members and taking advantage of our member benefits, you'll see that on there. And we're looking very forward to sharing it with all of you, but it's actual messaging that you can copy and paste in letters. And so we're hoping it will be useful for all of you. So I throw that out there.
Yeah, thanks, Marie. That's exactly the kind of resource I was gonna ask about.
Yep. I look forward to sharing it with you, Brian.
Great. Thanks, Marie. Well, it's 5 o'clock in LA, and I know it's a lot later for all of you guys. So I think we've hit that time when we're wrapping it up. We have notes. I know Chris and I have notes of things that we're happy to follow up with, our slides, plaques, examples, and other kinds of things. So we'll send those. We'll get those to Marie, and one way or another, we'll give them to you all, and feel free to share them to the other commission members. Rich and others, what you said in terms of inspiring you and getting you to think about new ideas, that was the intent. So I hope we succeeded. That was our goal, and just keep going. I mean, it's a great community. I love being there and meeting you all in person. But what you guys are doing is really important work. I think you already know that, but just to reinforce that. And thank you, Brian, for all of your work to help corral us all and coordinate this. And this is a different kind of CANT program than we normally do in terms of this kind of workshop and everybody being in the room with their own laptops in front of them. But it worked. So I hope it worked. So thank you. And
Thank you very
everyone-
much. It was really, really helpful, both of you
Yeah.
guys.
And go home. Good night, everyone.
All right, good night, everybody. It's great to be here.
Thank you.
What is the